I'm very excited to introduce tonight's presenter, Ari Hoffman, who is a columnist at The Forward and an adjunct assistant professor at NYU. He has contributed pieces to the Wall Street Journal, Tablet, Mosaic, and a range of other publications. He holds a PhD from Harvard University and a JD from Stanford University. So thank you so much, Ari, for joining us today, and I will hand things over to you.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, Julie. I hope everyone can hear me. Chag Sameach to everybody. I'm so grateful to you all for being here, and I can't wait until we can gather in person again and learn together. And that's sort of what my presentation is going to be about. And needless to say, before I start, I want to sort of urge everyone to jump in. I'd love to hear from you. Some faces are familiar friends and allies and fellow travelers, and others are new. And so thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. And I really, it's often said, but I think always meant that, the spirit of the learning and the spirit of the Beit Midrash is collaborative. And should be sort of rambunctious. So as much as we can capture that spirit, I would love to do that. I'm just going to share a PowerPoint presentation. One of the virtues of being one of the virtues of the virtual. The talk is entitled, or the discussion is entitled, The Digital Diaspora Between Clubhouse and Covenant. And what got me thinking about this was a sort of series of conversations throughout this past year when it became increasingly clear that we would have to renegotiate the spaces in our lives, that we would have to renegotiate not only where we went, but where we were. Right, and what that would mean as Jews, what that would mean as just sort of citizens and as people. And I think especially now at this sort of inflection, this moment where the sort of old world is maybe on the way out and the new world is not yet recognizable, not yet come to fruition entirely, is a good time to sort of think about what are the things that we want to leave behind us from this year. Right? What are the sort of things that were make do, that in the language of the rabbis were b'diavad, right? What were the things that weren't ideal and that we move beyond from? And on the flip side, what are the learnings, what are the recalibrations, and what are the adjustments that actually we deeply believe in taking with us into this new world? I think that reckoning and that accounting is vital. And so in our time together, what I'm going to try to do is give you a couple of arguments or a couple of theses or provocations. And then I'm going to sort of range widely between Jewish texts and sort of contemporary issues. And the goal, sort of a little bit like the Passover Seder, is to hopefully generate questions and generate thoughts. That's me. I got the sort of extraordinarily generous introduction. I write at The Forward. I write about politics and about culture. I teach mostly a great books sort of curriculum. You got a little bit about my background, and obviously feel free and feel encouraged to join me on Twitter, as well as my Substack newsletter, where I write about culture and Israel and Zionism and all that good stuff. On that note, I obviously wanted to begin. I wouldn't feel right beginning anywhere else besides saying that my heart and I'm sure many of the people on this call are in maybe in another part of the world, virtually or otherwise, and we're thinking of Israel and thinking of this sort of difficult week and the fights that lay ahead and the desire for peace. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, but I just wanted to sort of acknowledge that sort of straight off the bat. This, of course, many of you have seen this image of sort of this extraordinary, almost like a Pollock or some sort of abstract art. Of course, the reality is a horrific one of rockets and Israel's Iron Dome missile defense. So where are we, right? I would say this is a year, on the one hand, we have been displaced from space, right? We have been displaced from the sacred spaces that mean so much to us, displaced from the institutions, whether it's universities or the workplace. But on the other hand, we've been stuck in place, right? So what does it mean to be displaced from space and stuck in place, right? And what does it mean to live with that and in that paradox, right? In some ways, we've never been freer, right? We've never been freer. The link for many of us between work and life has somewhat geographically been severed, right? On the other hand, we've never been more constrained, constrained by health restrictions, by limitations on movement, by a new sort of regime of care and concern. You know, that's just sort of the state of us in some ways. And the other is an idea I'm increasingly thinking about, and not only myself, but others as well, is this: we're all dual citizens now, right? We all have two passports, and those two passports are not, you know, American and Israel or wherever. It's the physical and the virtual, right? That both of these dimensions of our lives are very real, right? It's no longer the case that sort of, I think that, you know, life happens in the physical world and the virtual world is like a facsimile of it or a sort of commentary on it. I think there are two primary texts of modern life, right? One is the life you're living in this world, and the other is the life you're inhabiting in the digital and virtual space, right? And the implications of this are enormous. It means, on the one hand, that we're essentially split, right? Or that we're commuters. We're commuters between these two zones. It also means that we have to worry about two different dimensions, right? We have to worry what happens in both, right? For example, I'm very worried now, like many of us are. On the one hand, you know, the threats to Israel, the physical threats. But on the other hand, right, what are the dynamics happening in the virtual world, right? What are the dynamics happening around the world of ideas, the world of social media, the world of Instagram? We'll talk more about that. But that is in now no less or differently real than the world we've generally taken to be the real one. So, right, we all carry two passports, the physical and virtual. And in fact, for many of us, it might be a sort of uncomfortable realization, but one that, if pushed, we would sort of have to agree to, that where our real life happens is increasingly online, or where what matters happens, or where are we more seen, right? Where do we more interact, right? I think that to really pose these questions honestly involves uncomfortable answers. And I kind of want to embrace that, and I want to push against that, and I'd love, at, you know, during the course of our conversation or at the end, to hear some of your thoughts about that. So out of that realization, I think two crucial questions emerge for me. The first is, can we make the virtual sacred, right? So can we somehow, what can we do with this online world, right? How can we renovate it? How can we elevate it? And how can we make it more like a place we'd want to live, right? This is a question for the sort of virtual world in generally, and it's a question for each individual platform that we use, right? And this is the sort of question that's happening now culturally as well as politically and in a regulatory sense, of what kind of places are these to be in, right? What kind of places are these to be in? And then the second question, right, is do we already have the tools we need, right? And I hope during our time together, what I'll suggest is that there are resources that we already have, right, to imagine exactly this eventuality, right? That the sort of language and tools of in the Jewish tradition and in sort of Revelation, in sort of in a kind of religious language, might be in fact what we need at this very moment.